So, hi everyone, and welcome to the second episode of our World of Publishing webinar series. My name is Lamar Giles, and I have been a professional storyteller for nearly 25 years. I've published over a dozen novels, have written for DC Comics, Star Wars, National Geographic, and even Nike. And I'm William and Mary's inaugural writer in residence. I'm hoping to engage the William and Mary community in fun and exciting ways to promote our incredible library, literacy, and general creative pursuits. The World of Publishing webinar series offers insightful conversations with publishing professionals to demystify the often perplexing process for anyone who's ever wondered, how do I get published? It is suitable for the career-minded writer, the casual writer, the student writer, and those who are simply curious. This session will be recorded and available for those who are unable to join us live today. But for those in the session, a Q&A box is available at the bottom of the window for you to submit questions that we will attempt to address either during the conversation or during a designated Q&A session before we close out. And without further delay, let's meet today's guest. Jody Corbett is an executive editor at Scholastic, where she works on middle grade and YA novels and occasionally nonfiction. She received her BA in English with a concentration in writing from the University at Albany before earning a master's degree in publishing from Pace University. As a kid, she became a reader as soon as her parents realized that the only time she wasn't talking was when she was reading, which meant they took her to the library a lot. She lives in New York City, where she belongs to too many book clubs and prefers swimming in the ocean in the winter rather than during the summer. Hi, Jody.
Mark.
Lee Boudreaux is an executive editor at Doubleday, where she landed her first job in New York in 1995. She went on to work as an editor at Random House, Echo, and Little Brown, where she had an eponymous imprint. She returned to Doubleday in 2017, where she publishes exclusively fiction. Some of the books she's edited over the course of her career are Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld, both The Song of Achilles and Circe by Madeline Miller, Less by Andrew Sean Greer, James by Percival Everett, and Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. Hello, Lee.
Hello.
Thank
Lee,
you
I
both.
think I've read every single one of those
Oh my
books.
God.
Just
I know.
FYI.
Well, I was just thinking, I love Circe so much. It was such a
Oh,
fantastic
same.
read.
God, thank you. That was one of my favorite books to ever work on.
So I'll kick us off. And again, anybody in the audience, if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A box. We'll try to get to them as the afternoon goes on. So for both of you, and Lee, maybe you can kick us off here. Can you each share how you got started in publishing and what drew you to editing specifically?
Sure. So it took me a minute to figure out how to get to New York because I am from a small town in Virginia. And somehow when I was at William and Mary, I did not catch on to the Ferguson publishing program. So I didn't realize that resource was sitting right in front of me. I worked as a paralegal for a couple of years, and then I thought, okay, I think reading is the only thing I like and am good at. And I wonder who those people are who get to do it. And I guess they're called editors. Again, had I known more about the business, I might have realized there were many other jobs that you can have in the book world that weren't just being an editor. But that's kind of where my mind went. I'd worked in bookstores too. After I left, I was a paralegal in Richmond. I went down to Atlanta because I thought, oh, they've got some small publishing there. I worked at bookstores there. And I thought maybe one day I'll grow up and work at Algonquin Books in Chapel Hill. That was like as big as I thought I would ever get. New York was way too big for me. And then a friend's mother gave me a book called Jobs for Bookworms. And in there was a chapter on the Columbia Publishing course. Now, or it was the Radcliffe Publishing course then. Now it's the Columbia Publishing course. And it was a 6-week class, half book publishing, half magazine publishing. And so I did that fully expecting to go back down south and work. And that introduced me, even though I was up in Boston for the summer, all the other kids in that program were coming to New York afterwards, and they were all going to live with each other. And publishing was big enough then that there were really that many entry-level jobs. So it was an incredible feeder right into the industry, even though most people don't stay more than a year or two, and then they decide that this job isn't for them for whatever reason, and then they kind of drift off. But once I did that publishing course, I was like, okay, I'll go to New York for just 2 years. I freelanced as a paralegal because you can't live in New York just on an entry-level editorial salary back in the day, in the 90s, which we're trying to rectify, but there's still, a ways to go on that. But I got here and I thought I'll just be here for a little while. And then I just kept at it and kept at it. And the job kept getting better because you go from just working on whatever your boss is working on to maybe getting to take on something of your own. And I just stayed and stayed and stayed. But I had my eye set on editorial, but I never imagined that I would stick it out in New York that long.
Wow, thank you for that, Lee. What about you, Jody?
I came from a family of teachers, and I originally started off, it's such a strange, people are like, what? I originally started off as an atmospheric science major in college, and then very quickly realized I did not like the physics department at the college that I was at. So of course I switched to English because that's what you do. But I didn't want to be a teacher because I know how hard that is. And then I found out you could get a master's in publishing. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. I want to be an editor. And like Lee, I didn't maybe fully realize what it was. And even after I took the program and I learned all about the other sort of areas, I thought editorial would be the best for me. Like that's where my strengths were. But I still wasn't fully prepared for what being an editor was. Like I don't get to just quietly sit and read and write letters and talk to my authors all day. There's so much public speaking involved, and I hate public speaking. And people don't realize that because I'm loud, so I can fake it a lot better. But I had to do a lot of work really, really early on to get good at like networking and small talk and presenting and like crafting pitches and things like that, because you are constantly the person who's first and foremost the advocate for the book to convince people to let you to buy it, to see the financial potential in it, as well as the literary merit in something. So it all worked out, but like I think to the point that has already sort of been made, like a lot of this hopefully is demystifying the publishing process, both for aspiring writers, but then also for aspiring publishing professionals, because I think people don't really know. They recognize the term editor or designer, and they don't realize, as Lee said, that you can work in the sales department, you can work in marketing, like there's so many, you can work in operations, in manufacturing, in production, like there's so many things that go into making a book. And a lot of those people are sort of the unglorified, like everybody makes movies about editors and designers and things like that, but nobody makes a movie about the guy who made sure all of the commas were fixed in your book.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about what you had to learn early on. So I wonder if you can keep us going a little bit. If you could tell us what your first big editorial win was, like the moment when you were like, I feel like I belong here. And I'm coming back to you, Lee. I want to hear that from you as well.
Gosh, that's interesting. And I love what Jody said about all those unsung heroes in publishing, because I'll tell you, there's another job called a managing editor, the managing editorial department. Okay, they're the people who keep all the trains running on time, which means when the editor or the writer are 3 months late getting a book in, they're the people who somehow manage to compress that production schedule and still have it on sale for Mother's Day, which is, everybody agreed, the opportunity you have to hit on the nose and get that book out there. So there really are gajillions of jobs. And the public speaking is also the part I wasn't expecting in this job. And I am exactly like you, Jody. It looks like it comes naturally to me, but it doesn't. I'm just loud, and I put more words out in 10 seconds than most people do. So I'm not even good at doing the elevator pitch. I just talk really fast at people.
Yeah.
But my first big editorial win, oddly, was Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld. And it's a book that I bid on that nobody else bid on. And I had an assistant who was reading it with me, and I have found out it is so important who you're talking to at any given moment, right? Sometimes there is just a person kind of not really in the train for working on a certain thing, and they say something to you at the right moment, and it just spurs further action. In the case of Prep, I had an assistant who was reading it along with me, and she just wouldn't let it drop. And this was, a girl about a teenager going through high school, and it was even told freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year. So when I took it to my boss and said, hey, can I buy this? The answer was like, no, it's too long and it's boring and it's episodic and rah, rah, rah. And then I have this assistant who was like, no, it's really good. Let's do it anyhow. So I was allowed to bid. Often what you do is you go, to your boss, and you have to get approved for a certain amount. And sometimes I was right at the point in my career where they were going to let me spend a little bit of money on a book nobody really cared about, because I wasn't, losing the farm, right? They were just letting me get my first car. And that's what they ended up doing. And I was the only one who bid. And I realized I had something unusual on my hands when two other editors who had had it in on submission came up to me randomly at other occasions and said, "You bought that book. I had that in, and I'm kicking myself for not buying it." And I was kind of like, wait, what? And then it just gathered steam in-house. People were reading it and liking it. And people in the publicity department, sometimes they get to put dibs on a book, like, I want to work on this one, I want to work on this one. And the more senior you are, you get to kind of cherry pick the good books. And if you're very junior, you get what's left over. And somebody picked that book, but then some of the other junior people wanted to work on it anyhow, even though you're only supposed to have one publicity person per book. So I ended up with this book that 4 people were working on, and all the other editors were like, how'd you get 4 publicists? And they came up with really fun ideas. Like, we sent out the press release for that book, and they used all of our high school yearbook photos. So it was just funny. It had a little bit of like marketing pizzazz to it. Even though, again, this was the smallest book on the list, nobody cared about it. And then the secret weapon of that book, I got some good blurbs on it. We could not come up with a cover to save our lives. Its original title was Cipher. I was in a cab with a friend of mine from college who worked in advertising, and I was talking about this book, and I was like, the title is Cipher, and we have to change it. He goes, okay, I'm seeing it. The title should be Prep, and the cover should be a blue book like you take exams in. And I brought those ideas in the next day. The title stuck. The blue book idea didn't. We couldn't come up with a title, with a cover. Finally, the author sent in something she'd ripped out of a women's magazine, and it was grosgrain belts. And she said, what about something like this on the cover? That cover is still on that book 20 years later. So it really was this accidental process of things going well that you didn't expect. And then it turns out that an absolute ton of people who work in media in New York City went to private schools. And they all kind of embraced it as the real story behind their lives. And you cannot underestimate how much people like to read about themselves, right? Like, that was the secret when Doubleday published John Grisham back in the 80s. Early 90s, they first got it out to lawyers all over the country. So, like, honestly, that grassroots, find your people, let them start talking about the book, and then it spreads, is and has always been true. So Prep was my first big win. It came out of nowhere. And so when it hit the bestseller list, we published it in January, a really famously quiet month. So a little book like that had a chance to rack up some sales. So it was a series of kind of unfortunate and like a series of fortunate accidents. And when it hit the bestseller list, I looked like some kind of crazy genius who had just taken this unknown novelist with this really long book about a girl going to high school, and it did well. But it's like so many other people participated in that process. So often your big wins come when you're not expecting them. It's not necessarily the book that you chased off 12 other editors to win and paid $2 million for. It is sometimes the ones that's like, wait, what is happening with that one over there? We got to pay more attention to it.
Well, that's a fantastic story, but I did feel attacked when you talked about authors turning in books 3 months late. Which
Rang some bells, did it?
Yeah, me and Jody have some experience there. Back to you, Jody. What was your first big win?
So mine is actually completely different, I think, because I work in kids' book, but also because I think maybe this tells you about who I am. The lens for like my success, I feel like when I felt like maybe I knew how to do this was, Lamar, you can attest to this as somebody who writes for kids. Kids tend to write authors lots of notes, like the good, the bad, the ugly, like all of it. And so my authors started sharing these notes with me, and they'd be like, oh, I heard from this kid, and they would like forward along this note, and it would be like this love letter to the author about how this book like changed their life or whatever. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because there's a person on the other end who's getting something out of it. Like the author and I like did a thing together that is bringing meaning somewhere in life. And like, that was the point, was to turn somebody into a reader. Like, especially those letters where it's like, I don't like reading, but I like this book. And you're like, great, then I did the thing that I was supposed to do. And that's so small scale in the grand scheme of like how the industry works. But some of that is the thing that I think really keeps you going when like the business minutia of it, where you're like, guys, it's just books. We're not doctors. I'm not a surgeon. I'm not saving anybody's life. But in a weird way, sometimes we are, and we don't know we are. And so it's like those little moments that made me think like, okay, I can keep doing this. I can keep building on because I've made the right choices so far. Like, my instincts are working.
No, I can't attest to that. It is something special about a young reader reaching out and saying you did something that made them enjoy something they didn't think they enjoyed. Now, thank you both for that. We actually have an attendee question. It's not an anonymous attendee, but they said there's someone who is struggling to be an editor. They're looking to get into the publishing industry. What would be your advice? They have applied to a bunch of editorial assistant jobs, but have had no luck.
It's really hard. Lee was pointing out that years ago, there were lots of different publishers, and obviously they've sort of all eaten each other and become imprints. And so it makes it really, really hard. And Lamar, when you had sort of given us a sense of some of the questions ahead of time, I actually thought that my answer to that previous question was that I got hired. That's how I knew I made it. Like somebody actually took a shot on me because it was competitive back then. And since I started in this industry, it's gotten even smaller. And so it is a thing that is potentially going to take a long time, but also if you are in a place, like if you're in New York already, or if you're in a place where there is some publishing, like when I was in college, I found a very small publisher that nobody had ever heard of in the town. And like, they didn't normally have interns. And I just called them and I was like, can I come be an intern? And they didn't know what that meant, but they were like, okay. Sort of thing. And so like, if there are ways for you to sort of start doing some networking, or even through LinkedIn and finding people who work at various publishers on LinkedIn and sort of following them and looking for job opportunities, it's just a slog. Like, and I know the economy is also bad in general overall. And so finding jobs is hard. But you just got to keep at it. And also think about like if you want to be an editor, think about other side entrances into it. Like, is there an administrative assistant being hired for the publisher? And maybe that's a good way in, and that will give you a broad overview sort of how the company itself is run. And maybe you'll find out that you didn't want to be an editorial because sales is really interesting to you, or things like that. And as Lee mentioned earlier, like managing it or production, those are also good entry points to then step into editorial. So like, I wouldn't limit yourself to just editorial jobs, even if that's the dream. Like, see if you can find another way in, and then you sort of network within the company and sort of let your goals be known, and you get to know some of those hiring managers, and sometimes that makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. It's hard. You get turned down a lot. I would say that is a thing about this business, whether you're on the writing end or on the publishing professional side. And I will just say, I did not get into that Radcliffe publishing course the first year I applied. I applied a second year. I did not get hired for the first couple of editorial assistant jobs. And then somebody hired me, and I think they hired me. They liked it because I was older than everybody else, and I showed up wearing like business clothes and looking so dorky, but it looked like I knew my way around an office. Like I knew what it was to have a boss like kind of peck at me all day long with various requests and kind of juggle them and run off and find the Xerox and figure out how to mail things and all that. I just knew office stuff, right? So I think I got hired not because she liked what I said about what I like to read in my spare time, not because I had a background in writing at all. It was, I think I literally showed up looking like I had been to an office at 9 o'clock in the morning for a good year of my life, 2 years of my life as a paralegal, and I could probably handle workload. So know that the jobs you're not getting do not necessarily have to do with something you are lacking. It's just like when authors pick editors to work with, you don't know what they want. Maybe they wanted somebody who seemed professorial. Maybe they wanted somebody who was their same age and gender because they'd really get the book. You know what I mean? It's just like people have things in their minds at different moments of what they need. And sometimes you're it and sometimes you're not it, but it doesn't really necessarily reflect that you are missing something. And it is a long road of just keep trying. Get your foot in the door wherever you can, because sometimes that intern experience or freelance experience or whatever is the thing that makes you stand out in the next pile of candidates, that you actually did that thing for some magazine in your hometown.
I also know that some publishers, we did it at Scholastic for a while, and we haven't in a couple of years just due to bandwidth, but I believe Penguin Random House still does. They'll occasionally, if you follow them on social media, they'll occasionally have like an intro, like a professional intro to publishing sort of free seminar that they offer for people. And so signing up for stuff like that and learning more, but then also that puts your like contact information with HR, and you could follow up and say, I went to this, like, do you have any job openings and things like that? If you can find some of those opportunities, especially now with Zoom makes it so much easier that you don't have to travel anywhere. It's, it makes it a little bit easier to sort of connect with some of those opportunities that publishers are doing from time to time.
Oh, no, thank you both. Two comments from the audience. The first one I'm just going to say because someone pointed it out. They're saying, Jody, that your volume is low, but I hear you loud and clear.
Oh, I
I
can
don't
talk
know.
louder.
No, I mean, you sound fine to me, but I'm saying it just in case there is something going on. Lee, can you hear both of us?
Yeah,
Okay.
both
Okay.
fine. Yep.
All right. And then the next comment, this is a fun one. This is from friend of the program, Anne Marie Pace, who just wanted to say hello to you, Lee, her Theta sister. Um,
Hi.
she wanted me to tell you how amazing you've been. Very inspiring career.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Um, well, Lee, I'm with you. I have another question.
Yeah.
You talked about like some of the things that we don't think about with editorial, like business things. What's a typical workday look like for you?
All right, the weird thing about being an editor is you will never edit in the office ever a day in your life, right? And you may not even edit during working hours. So your workday is filled with other chores on books. So first you've got an enormous stack of submissions. You're trying to read things quickly and figure out if this is something you need to read all of, you need to talk to your boss about, you want to buy, how many other people are trying to buy it. Like you are constantly shifting the priorities of what you're trying to read. Then you have all the books you're working on coming out in hardcover. Some of them are about to go on sale now, and they've got certain things you've got to be talking about, right? Is the author coming to town, and what are the events, and what's going on, and blah, 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 and are you getting any of the reviews you meant to? It's not my job to get the reviews, but it's still my job to know whether the New York Times is going to talk about that debut novel or not, right? That's going on all the time. Then you've got the books that are like 4 months down the road. Are those authors going on tour? What is the marketing going to be? Like you're the head of all of these things, even though other people are doing the marketing details on it, right? And then you've got paperbacks of the books you published a year ago, and all of those in different forms. You are getting covers on all of these books. You are writing the flap copy on all of these books. If you've got a paperback, you kind of look back at how the hardcover went. You're like, you know what? Nobody cared that that was a climate change novel, but everybody loved that it was a mother-daughter story. So I'm going to rewrite all that copy to talk about the thing that did resonate with people instead of all that hoo-ha I was talking about the first time. So you've got 20 books going on in these stages all the time, and then you're looking to buy new things, and then when you do your editing, and it takes a long time to edit, and you need to be in the headspace. Like when I was young and single and didn't have children, I could stay at home on a Friday to edit, and edit all day Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and just spend 8 hours in that world, and you are living in that book. It is so seamless for you. You could answer any question about it. You know what you want to say about every character, and I'd pack it off to that author on Monday. Right now, I don't get to do that, and editing 1 hour across 6 different days is not the same as spending 6 hours in the world of that book. So the day-to-day office work, and you have meetings about what's on the spring list. You do a lot of public speaking, like Jody was saying, where I'm talking to my in-house production department, art department, marketing department, all of them to say what's coming up in a year. Hey guys, I've got a new novel about this. Hey guys, I've got the next book by Madeline Miller, who wrote Circe, right? They need to know what's coming. Then I sometimes talk to librarians. Then sometimes I go on the road with an author and meet booksellers. So it's this constant, it's an exciting job. You never do the same thing twice. You're always working on new books and meeting new authors, and your priorities are always shifting. So if you're good at juggling, you came in thinking you were going to do one thing, and then you don't get any of that done, but you filled up 8 hours doing something else. Like, who are you going to get to blurb a certain novel? Oh, that list can take forever. And then somebody is like, oh, I saw Jenny Slate, posted on Instagram that she loves something or other. And you're like, now we've got to get a book to Jenny Slate. Like, it's a constant shifting whirlwind of stuff. And yet you've got to keep those 20 books moving on the track without letting something go in too late that could possibly, hurt the book. So it's a lot of shuffling. The editing, which is still my favorite part of it. My husband is always like, why do you still work so hard? Get your assistant to do that. And I'm like, no, that's the part I love. I love the editing. I love playing with sentences. I love playing with words. Love it, love it, love it. You could spare me writing flap copy all the time and just let me sit in a room and edit, and I would have been happy. So I don't want to give that part up. But you find reading submissions to take place at night and on commutes and things like that, and you find editing time by taking a day out of the office and your weekends, and like doing it in between like kids' soccer games. It is not a great work-life balance job. It may be getting better with younger generation because because the internet has invaded our lives so much that you never get to leave work anymore. And I think young people are rightfully trying to push back on that. Like, I am not saving lives here. How about I don't answer that email at 10 o'clock at night? But historically, the editorial position has been one where you had to take a lot home with you to get the brain space and the hours to work on it the way it needs to be worked on.
No, thank you for that. Jody, when you acquire a book, like whatever goes into that decision, you can speak to that too if you like. But once you know, like you want to acquire a book to edit, what are the steps you have to take on your end to be able to make an offer to the agent and author?
So it's a little, my understanding is it's a little different at every house. And so Lee was saying she just goes and talks to her publisher and that sort of thing. And so the way that it works at Scholastic is, first of all, like, if I decide that I want to buy a thing, then I go talk to my direct boss and tell her about it. And she's like, great. And then I go talk to my publisher about it. And he's like, okay, great. Like, start pulling together materials for acquisitions. We have an acquisitions meeting every week. And we pull together a P&L, which is a profit and loss statement, because it's the finances of the book. How much am I paying in advance? What's the unit costs for the book? How much money do I need for production, for manufacturing, for printing, for like all of these things? What's the royalty rate? How many units do I think I'm going to move? Because we are a business at the end of the day. It's art, but it's business. And so you still have to like prove that it's a like financially viable decision to do this book that you want to do, no matter how much you love it. Then I pulled together an acquisitions memo, which is sort of like my big sales pitch of like why I think we should buy this book. It includes a pitch for what the book is, the proposed publication dates, who the audience is, what the goals are, the author's sales track if they have it, what are some comparison titles that have sold within the last 2 to 4 years. I pulled those numbers from a system called BookScan, which captures a lot of retail sales throughout the United States, but not everything, but that's still the barometer that a lot of us use, that sort of thing. So I'm basically putting together a roadmap to try and get them to say, yes, I'm building the strongest case possible for this book. And then at Scholastic, I go to an acquisitions meeting, which sounds very intimidating to people who don't have to do this. But at our acquisitions meeting, everybody is there because we're sort of all in on the book from the beginning. So sales is there, marketing is there, publicity is there, our library marketing team is there, finance is there, our international sales force is there. All of the people who will be potentially touching the book at some point come and they sort of speak to their piece about whether, like, yes, Jody, the sales numbers that you estimated, like, you think we can move X number of copies, we agree with you. Or that's too high, we think we can do this instead. Or we actually think we can sell more. International says like whether or not they think they can sell it, publicity, like everybody gets to sort of talk about the project. And at the end of that conversation, I get a yes or a no about how I can move forward. And sometimes the answer is yes, but with caveats like, well, the advance that you put in is too high. So like rerun the numbers or adjust the sales figures or these sorts of things. And then I go off and make an offer and start negotiating with an agent. And that's for like a typical acquisition that doesn't really have, it's not an auction. I'm not competing with other people. It's not on like a really crunched timeline. The other caveat for Scholastic that is very different from any other publisher, including any other children's publisher, is if a project I think has potential for our clubs and fairs, which everybody remembers from when they were a kid, when they used to pop up in your cafeteria or your gym and you would go to school and buy books from the book fairs, or you would get that newspaper flyer and you would order a book from the book club and your teacher would hand it out like 2 weeks later when it arrived. So we partner really closely with them from the beginning. So if I have a project that I think has potential for them that they'll be able to do really well with, before I go to acquisitions, I will share it with them. And I will get their feedback and they will give me their potential sales number of what quantity they think that they could or couldn't use and that sort of thing. And so then that number will also be on the P&L because it's another distribution channel, another way for us to sell it. It's part of the conversation. Like the more avenues we have to sell a book in, whether it's, at your local bookstore, through the clubs and fairs, to the library market, all of these things, we want to be pulling as many levers as possible. So that's why we partner with them so early. And if they don't come on, that doesn't mean we can't buy it, but it's just good to have that conversation if we think it has potential for them. So we're a little slow at times just because we want everybody on board. But the benefit is down the line, there's no surprises where somebody's like, I'm sorry, you bought a book about what? And I have to sell it to who? Sort of thing. Like everybody is already in from the beginning and already excited about it when that season comes around.
No, thank you. Lee, taking it to the next level. Oh, did we lose Lee?
I think we lost Lee.
Oh, we lost Lee.
We can
Okay.
fill some time
Yeah,
while we wait for Lee to come
well,
back.
I got a question. Well, I was going to talk to Lee about the first steps she takes with an author once she acquires something, but I'll actually ahead a little bit and ask you a question about what it's like deep in the revision process. Like how collaborative is it, and how do you handle creative disagreements? And I saved that for you because I know exactly how it goes, but I want to hear your perspective
You're
on
like,
it.
I have been on the receiving end
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Jody Corbett's edit letters. It depends on the process and the author. Some authors are like, this is what you get and I will change nothing. And other authors are more collaborative and things like that. And so it can depend on the author and the process. But usually I'm writing down things as I go. Even from the first draft, I'm writing down like everything in my head because and it goes on a piece of chicken scratch paper or I type it into Word if I'm, that sort of thing. But that doesn't mean everything I write down ever makes it to an author. It's really unfiltered. Some of it I think an author would be horrified to see because I don't make it nice. I just write it, sort of thing. And then the thing that we don't always have the luxury of time for, but which I sometimes like, is I like being able to, I've read the thing and then I just think about it for a couple of days. Like you don't know what's going to randomly occur to you as you're like drifting off to sleep or while you're like sitting on the subway commuting home that like informs the story. You've probably definitely gotten an email from me like a couple of days after I've sent an edit letter being like, well, I was thinking some more, so I'm going to put this in the mix as well. Cause like, it just keeps festering there for me. And fester is a negative word, but it's not a negative thing. It just is there. And then I pull all my thoughts together in a letter. And you can attest to the fact that like my letters tend to be long, not because I'm like ripping apart everything in the book necessarily. I mean, it depends on the book, but because if I'm telling a creator that something isn't working, I also feel a sense of obligation, like this is part of my role in the process to present you solutions. Like a lot of editorial is problem solving. And so you don't have to take the solution that I offer, but it's really unfair of me just to give you a laundry list of what isn't working and then not offer, in addition to that, some path to solving the problem, to just sort of leave you there with that bag of here's what's not working. So presenting solutions, I think, tends to be what makes my letters long. Welcome back.
Hi, sorry about that.
It's totally fine. And then the creator doesn't have to do exactly what I suggest. They are suggestions. A lot of times they'll come up with a better solution than what I suggested. It's not about being right. It's just about making the story better. So like if I say X, Y, and Z and you're like, well, what if I did A, B, C instead? You're like, great, if that solves the problem, I like that idea. Let's do it. And then we usually have a conversation, like we chat on the phone. Sometimes before I actually hit send, I've started writing my letter. Sometimes I'll letter, like, let's see, are we on the same page? And we'll have a conversation. Then I'll finish my letter and then I'll send it to an author. And then we'll talk again some more. It's really, my job is to be here as a sounding board to help solve the problems, to help point out things maybe you didn't notice about the book, or like, is this the theme, or this motivation doesn't make sense for this character, or this plot point felt like out of nowhere. Like, and there's always rounds. So like sometimes everything I wrote down doesn't make it into the letter because it's too nitty gritty for the phase we're at right now. Like if we're on first draft, then we're pulling apart big picture stuff. If we're somewhere in the middle, you don't need me line editing yet. Those sorts of things. And sometimes the thing I wrote down in the first draft, naturally, like I wrote it down, never sent it to the creator, but it naturally gets resolved through the revision and I never even have to mention it. It just sort of takes care of itself as pieces shift and move around and stuff like that. And when you get to the line editing phase of things, like every author is different. There are some authors who get like a real heavy rewrite to really help them polish stuff up. And then there are others where I don't touch a lot. I don't do a heavy line edit on you at all. By the time we're at that point, it's like smooth sailing. But that's not the case for every author. Everybody's
Well,
a little bit different.
Well, what I find comforting in this answer is I thought it was just my edit letters that were long. So
No,
the fact that
I'm
you just write,
long-winded.
but no, I mean, I can speak to the process because we've done it several times now. And the big story that we always joke about is the first time we worked together on Overturned. And the draft I turned in, I wrote in third person. And the letter you came back with, and this is our first time working together. And it was really nice the way
I
you
am
said it.
so That was so bold of me.
No, but it was right. I mean, but this is the thing. Wrote a whole novel in third person, and Jody's like, "Hey, what do you think about this being first person?" And and, and she's like, "You don't have to do it, but I'm just
Okay.
asking. I'm just asking." And in my mind, and this is our first time working together. In my mind, I'm like, "Wow, she wouldn't have asked if I nailed the third person. You know, if I'd gotten it right, she wouldn't ask this question." And so my habit is to start a second draft from scratch anyway. And so I rewrote that whole book as you requested. And it was the absolute right decision. It's the first time I had a book reviewed in the New York Times book review. That book led to me getting a film agent who ended up selling rights to a different book and really helped. Like, it was really like a springboard for my career when I thought I was done. Like, my first two books didn't really go the way I thought they would go. My third book was with you, and your edits, I think, really helped elevate it. And then we've done a bunch of books since that I think have been great. I love working with you. So that's the
Love working
collaborative.
with you.
Yeah, yeah. And Lee, I was asking before we got cut off, I was just curious, like, when you acquire a book, what's the first step you take once the author and agent say yes? Not the deep revision stuff, but like what happens once you know you're going to be working with this person?
Often at this point, I've talked with them before the offers, and that's something that the agents have kind of initiated. It didn't used to happen that way 20 years ago, but now it's kind of like, oh, I'll be setting up phone calls with all the editors. And, it used to be that you had to come to New York and meet editors in their offices. So only an author who was already here, or really this was going to be a high ticket item, was going to come have those meetings. Now that we can all do it on Zoom, it's, completely proliferated. So often, if there's a book I really like, I'll get on the phone with the author. Sometimes the agent is on there too. And sometimes I'm interviewing them, like, is this author going to be good at doing what we want them to do? And are they open to my ideas? And sometimes I'm trying to convince them that I'm the one they should pick, right? So sometimes they're getting to choose me, and sometimes I'm choosing them. There's a different dynamic on different phone calls, depending on how much interest they've gotten. So sometimes I've already spoken with them. If I win the auction, I run around and whoop and holler and cheer and congratulate them. And then we try to get on the phone to get back down to whatever it was we touched on. But this is such a quirk of mine, I need to line edit the book to know what my big picture thoughts are. Like, I am not good, and I like to just live in it and do it all at once. I'm not good at having read the book once and saying, listen, here are your big picture things, and we need to tighten this up, and the sister disappears too soon, and I want to see more of this kind of stuff, and making them do it on their own somehow, or making them do a first crack at that. Somehow I feel like that's not enough. And I work with a lot of debut writers, like a ton, and I feel like they've wrestled with the demons. They've put 100,000 words down on paper. They've made a lot of decisions, and I kind of want to sit back down with it again and go through it. And that's when I do my thinking of like, oh, that's why the sister isn't working. It's because in the first half of the book, I somehow thought she was this kind of character, and now at the end she's doing all these things, and that doesn't fit in. But now I know why, because in that conversation we had, you told me it was based on your real life sister who acts that way, and you're just going to have to lose that part of the book, right? So it's like I will give them a marked up manuscript, and it's true that I will go lighter on the line edit there. I'm not trying, and I'm definitely not like fixing commas, but I'm just saying, like, if I'm noticing word repetitions, I'm marking out what they can cut, and I'm trying to be very explicit in the margins about why something's not working, because I'm trying to show the working of this reader's mind, like I never just mark something out and don't explain why. So they get a very explanatory marked up manuscript, like usually marks on every page. And then I will try to do a letter. My editorial letters are also very long. I once had an author say, after he got the editorial letter, why did you buy it if you hate it this much? And I was like, oh, maybe that was a little too detailed for them. I try to give them a letter that I'm trying to make briefer, with what the big picture items are, and just kind of leave that not overly explained, and let the writing on each individual page kind of buttress that argument. So I might say something like, the ending just wraps up way too fast, or I would love to have you explain these things more because they're so interesting to me. So don't be afraid to go into more detail there. But they will see over the course of that 300-page manuscript where I had all those thoughts, right? Here and here and here and here. So I'm trying to give them a lot of guideposts on what to do. And if I ever write something in there for them, what Jody said is true. They are not expected to take every one of my suggestions by a long stretch. I would be surprised if they took half of them. And secondly, if I write something in, it is meant to show them like something like this, but don't take my words. You're always meant to do it yourself. Right. And I find that most writers, you know, they've done their best and they don't know anymore. Is that sister character working or is that a distraction from the book? They want an impartial read to come in cold and be like, man, I wanted all you had to tell me about Mesopotamian art, but I didn't need this side plot with the sister, you know? They didn't know anymore whether the sister worked or whether the art plot was too much, and they want somebody helping them guide, you know, what's the right balance here. Their solutions are always the right one, not what I thought they needed to do. And again, I'm just meant to raise questions like, you lost me here, I got bored here, this is too much detail here, and then they're going to work out why that. Or I often say, I don't know at this point that that thing is happening, is that right? Or I think this is what I'm keeping my eye on, is that right? I want to make sure their intentions are matching whatever I'm experiencing, because if that's not the case, they want to fix that. They want to make sure the effect they were trying to have on the reader is working. And I'm there to just kind of show what the average reader is thinking at this point. And if that doesn't match their plan, then I think they want to know it at this point. And I usually do a couple rounds. Like that's a pretty big round. And then I'll take the manuscript again and expect to mark it up, but a lot less. And sometimes very little. And sometimes you only end up with like, okay, they're just 2 chapters. We're going to drill down on again, but the rest of it we don't need to keep fiddling with.
Well, Lee, when we started today, I think both Jody and I expressed like excitement to speak to you because we've read a number of books that you have edited. You've edited some big books, and I'm curious, when a book becomes a breakout hit, like whether it's a sales giant, an awards darling, or it's getting adapted into like some popular TV show or movie, what role does an editor have at that point when the book's popularity is sort of exploding that way? Is there more for you to do, or are you out of that process?
Sometimes there's less to do because if the book really starts working and taking off, then all eyes are on that book. Often I have thought the more expensive a book was to buy, the less pressure is on me. I have a very odd attitude about that.
No, I agree.
Like all eyes are already on it. The ones that you have to worry about are the ones that you didn't pay that much money for. And they're not a priority title at every meeting that is going on. And they're the ones you need to worry about. Like, are we spending all of our time finding influencers for that big bestsellers book? What are we doing to find those same influencers to get anybody on TikTok talking about this other book? You know, like Madeline Miller's going to be fine writing book 3. A person who's writing a little book like Song of Achilles was when we first published it, like how's that going to get any steam or, you know, any motion behind it? So sometimes there's less for me to do because by then the marketing team is like, is James working? Here is more money to keep it going all summer long. Here is a big campaign to advertise it all through Christmas. Oh, did B&N pick it as the book of the year? Then that was so much money spent on signage to go in every Barnes and Noble in the country, right? Like I no longer am fighting any uphill battle there. But when a book gets big, you do have big decisions to make. Do you bring that author back for a whole second round of a tour? Has that author done enough and they shouldn't be asked to do anymore? You know, like Percival Everett was on the road for us forever so generously. Go ahead, Jody.
I was going to say, well, then you run this balancing act of you have this runaway success and you want to put them back on the road, but you also want them writing a new book. And you're like, and sometimes how do we want to spend the talent's time is also a question. Like it's finite. So you can have them do this or you can have them do this. And what is the priority for the book? Are we happy to give them an extension on their deadline, move it to another season to allow them to help promote now, like on the tail of this sort of upswing? Like those are all sort of factors that go into it. And sometimes I think other departments, even though they know the authors, are not necessarily thinking about the time. So then as an editor, your job, because your job in everything is you're basically a project manager in addition to actually having this editorial role. Your job is to also be the one to be like, hey, just got to raise the alarm. Like that means that they're not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z for the current draft. So like, what do we got to have a conversation? Like what strategy are we taking here?
Right. Oh. So yeah, it just becomes it can be a lot of ongoing conversations at a very high level. Do we do another special edition for Christmas? You know, and again, and then sometimes you're like, they want to pull together something that you cut from the book to be supplemental exclusive material that
Right.
only Barnes and Noble will have. And you're like,
Yep.
wait a minute, what? You mean that scene that I never liked? We're going to get that back out and put it in a special edition? How did that happen? And then the author's like, see, I told you that was a good chapter.
You're like, okay, fine.
And you are the author's primary relationship, even though they get to know their publicist well and so forth and so on. So you want to make sure they're okay with everything you're asking of them, and you want to make sure they understand why you're doing it. And sometimes they're the one who's like, let me go back on the road for 10 more cities, and you know that's actually not necessary, and that the bookstores don't want it. You know what the bookstores don't want at Christmas time? A bunch of authors trooping in and out. They need 20 extra employees to work that night, right? And the book is already selling a ton because it's Christmas season, right? So sometimes you're telling them no when they're asking to do more. So there is just a lot of balancing emotions, balancing priorities, balancing people's interests across, kind of a longer time frame now, because now you're conducting business at a very high level, and you want to have that next book. You want to have an author who loves everything that was done the first time, and so forth.
Now, thank you both for that insight. We have about 15 minutes left, so we'll get to the audience questions in a moment. But I want to take the opportunity to remind everyone that our third installment of the World of Publishing series will take place on Wednesday, November 19th at noon. And we will be hosting New York Times bestseller and book packager Dhonielle Clayton. I'm going to try to share a photo promo for this. We'll see if I get the technology right or not. But if you can see on our screen, Dhonielle will be with us on the 19th. You can screenshot this, or I will put a link to the event for you to register in the chat. It'll be a good time. We'll keep this going. It'll be our last one of this semester, but hopefully, if everyone's having a good time learning about the industry, we can do some more things in the spring. And so, am I back? Can you
He's
see?
fantastic.
Yeah, Dhonielle's
That's going to be
fantastic.
great.
So let's look at these audience questions. We have 14 minutes, so I'm just going to run straight through them in order, and we'll see how many we can get through. This is from Michael. He says, can you compare book editing with scientific peer-reviewed journals in terms of the editor's relationship and communication with the author? I don't know much about that. I don't know if either of you know about the peer-reviewed journals.
My understanding of peer review journals is that tends to be more like within the science community or the academic community, and I don't have a lot of experience with academic publishing. It's not, we do some of it here at Scholastic, but it's a completely, we literally have an education division that does it, and so somebody there might know more about it, but it's not really something that I even in the nonfiction world, it's not something that I have come across and had to deal with much. So I don't know that I have anything to offer on it.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I don't either. I don't know. I can't even edit nonfiction. I find it too difficult. All those facts, you can't move things around. You can't be just like, gosh, your adolescence was so boring. Can we cut all that?
You can still cut it.
Next question is from Frank. Do any books make it out of the slush pile, or does the slush pile even exist?
The slush pile at Scholastic does not officially exist anymore. We have a corporate policy that it's too overwhelming. We already are getting submissions, so many submissions from agents, and we're sort of relying on them to sort of sift through and find the good stuff and send it along to us, that if we were also accepting unsolicited submissions, that would literally be all I did, and I would never be able to keep up with it. There are some exceptions to that at times. For instance, within the children's community, there's an organization called SCBWI, which stands for the Society of Children's Book Writer and Illustrators, and they're a fantastic organization. So if you are interested in writing for children, I highly recommend you check them out. They have a lot of regional branches for them, so there's probably one in your community. And they do a lot of conferences and conventions, and they bring together aspiring writers or, established writers and publishing professionals. And so a lot of times an editor or an agent might go and speak at one of these conferences and conventions to a small group of people. And usually they'll say, for the next however many weeks, months, whatever, you may send me the first 50 pages of your manuscript. They will make exceptions for people who happen to have been in a conference or at a convention with them. But that's pretty much it for Scholastic, just because of the sheer volume.
Yeah. Same at PRH, and I will tell you, even 25 years ago when I was an editorial assistant, what we did with the slush pile was go into a conference room, order pizza, and then take manuscripts out of one envelope and put them back in another envelope. Like, it was not a real exercise. We were leaving, the sign up that said, submissions accepted, when that was really not true in any meaningful way. But do remember that the agents are looking at their slush piles, right? Like, I got an email, yesterday. I got a whole submission yesterday from an agent at ICM, a huge CAA now, a huge firm, saying, like, I found this in the slush pile and could not believe it just arrived so fully formed and beautiful on my desk. So, that is what querying agents is all about. Their door is open to find new clients.
This is from an anonymous attendee. Do you think writers should hire editors to review their work before submitting that work to an agent?
You want to go, Jody?
I think that is a personal decision everybody needs to make. It doesn't feel wholly necessary to me in a lot of ways, unless you've already submitted that project and have been getting a lot of feedback that it needs further work, and you're not, like, agents aren't sort of grasping onto it and you're interested in getting some more feedback, because agents or editors often don't have time when they're saying no to a project to explain to you why they're saying no. It's just one of the things that's a place where we've had to be like, I kind of got to draw a boundary here, because they just don't have the bandwidth to really get into it unless something is super special and there's like a really clear. But usually an agent works with a writer. They'll do some revising together before they go out on submission to editors, depending on the shape of the book. And then you're going to work on it again with whatever house editor potentially ends up acquiring it. So it might not actually be necessary for the cost ahead of time to get an editor, unless you're having a really hard time with that project connecting with an agent or sort of finding an outlet and you really, really believe in it and you just think maybe with some more work kind of thing. But I also think that before you do that, you should make sure you have really solid beta readers, you're part of a writing community nearby, and you're getting that feedback already.
There is nothing to add to that answer. It was so perfect.
Awesome. We have another anonymous question. What qualities in an editorial assistant are most valuable to you? What do you look for when hiring an assistant? That's a good question.
I did just hire a new assistant.
Ooh, do tell. What did they bring to the table?
I need you to be so organized. Okay. And I didn't realize that until I just had an assistant who wasn't that organized. The constantly shifting things, you really need to be able to stay on top of it. And that means know how to control an inbox that just sometimes gets out of hand, like have your systems down for how you do it, write things down. I am amazed at how many young people come to the office and it's like, no, it's up there. I can just click through 75 screens and find it. There is something different about having your list of things and having things printed out in front of you and knowing dates and knowing who's working on a project immediately. Show up before 9 in the morning. Like, get to work at 9. Don't make your boss get there before you, and read things quickly and do it with an appetite. That's what your skills are: organization, ability to constantly reprioritize. But I would say the ephemeral thing that sets apart an excellent assistant from one that's just kind of putting in the time feels like the appetite for the work. There's no real reason to go into this line of work if you don't love it. It's not particularly high paying, and at all. There's a long time before you even get to the level of, like, keeping your head above water financially and not needing 4 roommates. It is always a lot of work. There is never going to be a moment when you're not needing to take some of your personal time to catch up on work. If you don't want to do that in your 20s, you're not going to stand out as an editorial assistant who's going to get the extra work given to them when that becomes the fun thing to work on, right? Like, and having people in the office, even though we're all allowed to work remotely from time to time, it makes a big difference. Good things happen when you're here and somebody walks by your desk and sees you and says, I've got this weird book on surfing. You don't know anything about surfing, do you? Do you want to read it? And then you get to, like, show the publisher that you're a really good reader of things, even though that was a very unofficial suggestion. So I would say, really, the appetite. It's not about, do you read what we publish? Show me that you're not just reading your college syllabus and that you know what a bestseller is when you see it. That's very worthwhile. But I would say, honestly, the appetite for the work and an ability to stay organized over constant. You are a detail person in this job. If you lose track of the small picture to think about how much you love the book on, you know, dragons. Like, it's just not going to work. You need to be able to keep track of 75 pieces of that book that are moving at all times.
I would also add, I feel like a lot of job descriptions say things like be a self-starter, and that feels like vague. And my interpretation of this from having good assistants and bad assistants has been this isn't at the beginning of the day. I don't give my assistant 5 tasks to do that have to be done by 5 o'clock. Everything is always rolling. And to be an editor, there's not usually managing it is there to keep you on track, but only to a degree. Like, you have to be able to schedule your day. You have to find the time to edit the manuscript. Your boss isn't coming to you and being like, did you edit Lamar's new manuscript yet? Like, they're not in the minutia of like what you need to do. There's a lot of stuff that you just have to be an adult and be able to sort of manage the work that's on your plate and get the deadlines done and know that, like, okay, I'm going to push editing Lamar's manuscript by 3 days because I got to do this other thing. But I know, because it's the 3rd draft, I can still get it back to him by the end of the week and we'll be okay. And we'll still be able to get it into production by next Wednesday. Like, you have to start learning how to do those skills, because nobody else is going to really schedule your day or your workload for you down to a great detail the way that, like, I think happens in other jobs. So, like, to me, that's what a self-starter is. Like, you don't have to have that skill walking in, but you need to be able to learn it from your boss and sort of fall into that groove. And you also need to come with problem-solving skills. As an editor, that's what you're doing in the edits to the book when you're working with a creator. But I also need you to solve the problem of, like, marketing needs like ba 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 ba, and my boss is in a meeting until 5 o'clock today. Is that something that I have this? Can I get it started for them and have something to show them when they're done at 5 o'clock so we can get it to marketing by 6 o'clock? Like, okay, I got the request. Can I get started on that? When I know that, like, for instance, one of the things editorial does at Scholastic, I don't know if this is true where you are, Lee, but I am responsible for writing both flap copy, but also all of the metadata that goes out to online retailers. So whatever you read on Amazon, whether it's a review, whatever, I put that into a system somewhere that somebody else feeds out, but I had to do it. So, like, when you have an assistant, that was one of the tasks that, like, the assistant did. And so, you know, the catalog is going live on this date, and so it has to be in. So, like, the assistant is like, okay, I got the email being like the catalog live date. So I put on my to-do list. My boss didn't have to tell me. I put on my to-do list to update, and then I showed it to my boss 2 weeks before the catalog went live so that they had time to review it. It's like learning those ins and outs and problem solving. To me, that's what a self-starter is. It's like nobody's telling you every day, here are the 5 tasks you have to do to cross off your to-do list before you're allowed to leave at 5, because everything is sort of rolling. And so I need to be able to trust that, like, you're going to get it done, because at some point you're not assisting anybody. The goal is for you to, it's like a mentorship. You're learning to be an editor. In exchange, I'm teaching you how to edit and bringing you into projects. And Lee is saying when you're in the office, it's easier to sort of have those opportunities. But, like, you want to be an editor in your own right, standing on your own 2 feet. So you need to be able to manage all of these things as well.
So we only have 3 minutes left, so I apologize to the questions that are still outstanding. I put my email address in the chat. If you still want to answer, email me your question. I'll try to get back to you. I'm going to take the last question because I think it's important, and I'll leave it to you, Lee. It seems to be the topic of the day. What are your thoughts on artificial intelligence in the industry, relating to your role or publishing in general?
Right. We're all wrestling with that right now. And I'll tell you, I just came out of a meeting, you know, a week ago. Do I think it's ever going to take over editing? No. Do we even think it's going to take over being able to write some of that copy Jody was just talking about? Not the book description, not that, because that is what we do as editors. Why is anyone going to read Circe, right? And that is not a matter of just pulling kind of keywords out of the air. Like, you have to give that some thought and articulate, like, what is Circe catching at this moment, and what does it speak to, and what other, you know, what's the wave it might catch? Like, that really does take some synthesizing of real intelligence, you know? So it's like, we don't think we're turning things over like that whole cloth. What we do hope it can do for us is say, we have 20,000 books in paperback, and they could be brought to light as news events or as trends or as a movie release are happening, and nobody can keep those 20,000 in their head. And it's something that we always kind of fall back on. If AI can be helpful to us on being like, oh, tariffs in the news every day, here are 5 big econ books that are valid, that could be brought back. So if we could use it for things like that, if we can use it for updating metadata, you know, that would be helpful. Some people I've heard are, giving it a go with an editorial letter, meaning they record an entire presentation we do and then see if it can be boiled down into something. And people are experimenting with that. But I think, okay, some people are going to be good at task management and thinking, what can this do to condense all the verbiage I am capable of producing, but can it put it in order? I'm probably not even going to try that. But if it can do something like backlist sifting for this company at large, that seems worthwhile. If it can take off a human's plate incredibly time intensive projects like that, that would be useful. But Jody, are you thinking differently at Scholastic? Like, we're very much thinking it's not replacing the humans in a lot of ways in the intellectual work, but some of that bulk work, perhaps.
I have a lot of complicated feelings about AI because even you saying, we're going to have it sift through and help make these things pop. My immediate brain is like, how is it sifting through to know it's tied to a cultural moment? Did we feed
what did we
the
feed
book?
into it?
Like, did we feed the book into the machine? And so now the machine has all that data. I can't get that cat back out. Sort of like, we're done. And so is that terrifying? Like, can we even trust our own publishing company to sort of put that our own content into a secure device? Because how is it going to be used in the future under a different owner, under like who knows? And so I just tend to be so terrified of AI because we also, like, humans also have to stay employed. And so why are like this, the creative, the art, like this is the enjoyable stuff. So like, why are we not figuring? I would rather AI knows how to wash my dishes so that I don't have to do that sort of thing. That I would like AI to help me write an edit letter. Like, that's the part of my job I like.
Right.
Kind of thing. So I just tend to be really hesitant, mostly not because like AI is inherently evil in any way, but because I don't trust humanity to always do what I think is the right thing. But I would like to find a way to feel okay using it as a tool, because I do agree in theory it could be helpful in taking some more mundane tasks off the plate. And if it freed up more time for me to actually sit and think and chat with creators and do the parts that I like, then that would be ideal.
I would love it if it were good at coming up with comp titles, because that is something I am
That's something
at.
Everybody struggles with.
Right. So it's like, if it could get good at that and actually look at all the books we've published and find 3 titles within the past 5 years that have to do with that. If it could get good at that, that would be amazing.
Yes, that is the reoccurring thing I've heard that everybody say.
Who do I go to for blurbs? If I, right now I do that with my assistant. We kick around ideas and it stimulates other ideas. Like, it would be amazing to get a jump start. But if it tells me Lauren Groff would be a good blurber for every book I publish,
right? You're like, thank you, I knew that.
Yeah.
Hey, well, we're at time. Lee, Jody, thank you both for coming to the webinar. Thank everyone that attended. The next one's November 19th. Feel free to register. Send me any additional questions. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you all.
Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure.